Okay, so this is um, the Tuesday night chanting group, and tonight is the first Tuesday night of June, and so on the first Tuesday night of the month, we always have one chant that we talk about. Tonight, we're going to talk about the Heart Sutra, and so instead of doing a bunch of chants, which is what normally happens, we'll do the evening bell chant just to start us off, and then we'll do the Heart Sutra. We're going to do the Korean version of the Heart Sutra this time, and then the rest of the class will be open for discussion, questions, whatever we come up with to talk about in terms of the Heart Sutra. So, but we'll chant now.
지혜
Okay, so we'll try to save 3 minutes at the end to chant the Heart Sutra again. And so that time we chanted the Heart Sutra in the actually the Chinese version, but with the Korean pronunciation. So it's called Sino-Korean, which is the technical term for when you pronounce the Chinese characters, each character, but give them the pronunciation that Korean people use for those characters, but it's still chanting the same thing. So it's basically Chinese with a Korean accent. And if a Korean person who isn't a Buddhist hears you chanting that, they won't know what you're saying because it's not in Korean. The sounds are Korean sounds. It's like well, actually, when we chant it, a Korean person hears that and they will think that sounds, you know, even if it's a Korean Buddhist, they'll think those Americans can't pronounce it right, is what they'll think. Anyway, so oh yeah, but it's when we chant it like that, one of the things that's good about that is that we're chanting exactly, there's 260 characters in the Heart Sutra, and each character has a very, in a way, it has a very clear meaning, but when you put them together to make, the Heart Sutra, the meaning still requires a lot of, investigation. But if you want to begin that investigation really properly, it's good to get familiar with. You don't have to learn Chinese, you don't have to learn Korean, but that's kind of a, you do have to deal with these characters. I mean, anyway, that's my opinion. It's good. Also, it's the when we chant it in English, we say, Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva while practicing deeply the Prajnaparamita. Sometimes people will try to make the English chanting a little bit more rhythmic and melodic, a little more musical. But the Korean, when you chant the Korean version, it has a kind of a built-in rhythm and poetry to it that's actually very nice and, in my opinion, difficult, if not impossible, to reproduce in English. And people make attempts, but you have to be, basically, in order to come up with a good chantable version of the Heart Sutra in English that is, has the same poetic quality as well as this, actually, conveys the meaning properly. You have to be a fully enlightened poet. And well, you have to be a fully enlightened, really good poet in order to do that. Anyway, that's my opinion. Now, I've got some things that I want to talk about tonight, but I would also kind of want to ask what other people are interested in delving into. This is already the second class that we've done on the Heart Sutra in our discussion. I'm reaching down here because I want to get something to write on if people come up with ideas or suggestions for topics, because I want to keep track of it, because I would like to continue talking about the Heart Sutra for a while. There's a lot in the Heart Sutra. We could spend the rest of our lives looking into the Heart Sutra. We probably won't do that. We'll probably eventually move on to some other chants. But what questions or ideas or things do people have that you'd like to look into? I can, well, actually, so one thing that I do have to show, and please interrupt me. Tiffany, you turned your camera on.
Well, I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
How did Avalokiteshvara achieve that emptiness? Because I'm
Hmm.
having a little bit of trouble letting
Hmm.
go of some attachments
Yeah.
and desires at the
Hmm.
moment.
Hmm. Right.
So I would really like some help with that.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that I have that I wanted to show and share with people is a commentary on the Heart Sutra that actually addresses that question in a way that I think is quite good. So the the commentary is like, I don't know, It's about 120 pages long, and half of it is just on the one phrase, while practicing deeply the Prajnaparamita. And and so when we say Prajnaparamita, so Prajnaparamita means the wisdom paramita, which is one of the paramitas. And so practicing deeply the Prajnaparamita implies practicing all of the paramitas, which is how you get to the wisdom paramita. You don't just jump right to the wisdom paramita. You don't just jump right to emptiness. People try, but and yeah, you can try. Go ahead, but the way that Avalokiteshvara did it, and the way that she teaches it, is that you cultivate all the generosity, discipline, patience, diligence, meditation, and wisdom, and you work on all those. You don't necessarily work on them one at a time, because you have to be pretty really actually advanced along the bodhisattva path to even complete even the first paramita of generosity. But that's what this commentary is. The commentary is written by a guy named Kuiji, and he's important because he was the student of the guy who wrote the Heart Sutra, Xuanzang. So the Heart Sutra originally comes from the teachings of Avalokiteshvara, but it comes to us by way of I guess Avalokiteshvara spoke it originally in Sanskrit, or at least that's the form that was written down, that Xuanzang, this Chinese master who lived like 1500 years ago, give or take, he brought the Sanskrit version back from India to China and translated it into Chinese, and then he trained a bunch of other people in Sanskrit, and in what he had learned not only of the Sanskrit language but of the teachings of Mahayana Buddhism from Mahayana Buddhist teachers in India. And so Kuiji was his most senior student, and so Kuiji then wrote a commentary on the Heart Sutra. So since he's writing a commentary on the version of the Heart Sutra that his teacher translated and brought with him from India, it's a pretty, I would say, reliable commentary. And like I said, he talks a lot about the paramitas. And so, how do you do that? How do you develop all 6 paramitas? That's not, that's a lifetime's, many lifetimes of work. But how do you get there? Because you said, Tiffany, because you still have some things that you're attached to. Is that what you said?
Right. Like logically and fundamentally, I
Yeah.
understand
Right. Yes.
that the attachment to certain things is causing me an immense amount of suffering.
Hmm.
And I practice generosity, I practice patience and discipline and all of these things. And yet fundamentally I know that if I let go, I will be okay. My
Hmm.
freedom is
Yeah.
in letting go. And still I'm trapped in the attachment. Like in the story of the Buddha's life, when Ananda was having doubts at first because he
Hmm.
missed his wife and he in her beauty and how graceful she was and stuff, but was had trouble letting go. But even at the end of the Buddha's life, Ananda still had that attachment
Yeah.
because he didn't want the Buddha to go either.
Hmm. That's right. Yeah.
And
And
that is like, that's kind of hopeless feeling a little bit.
yeah. So it shouldn't be hopeless, because Ananda wasn't hopeless. I mean, there is kind of a it it is somewhat sobering, or I don't know, that to realize that even someone who's very advanced will still have stuff that they're working on. Even someone like
Right.
Ananda, who
So
could
like still the attachment, it's
hmm
crazy. Like how do
hmm
we let go of that?
yeah, yeah. And well, we let go of what we can let go of, and we take it. So if you look at Ananda's situation, in a certain way, you can kind of take some solace from it. That, well, if Ananda, still had these, hang-ups or attachments, and some of Ananda's attachments were actually good, because Ananda's attachment to the Buddha when the Buddha was dying was actually played a very positive role, because he so what happened, and this is one version, there's different versions of what happened when the Buddha died, but when the Buddha died, uh, was dying, Ananda became very, very upset because of his attachment to the Buddha. There were 500 main disciples of the Buddha, and 499 of them were enlightened, and Nanda was the one who wasn't, of the inner circle. All right, at least that's the way the story is told. But um, I sometimes I think that the other ones were maybe just pretending to be. I don't know. I mean, like, the Buddha is dying, and Ananda was the only one showing any personal feeling about it. I mean, enlightenment doesn't mean turning off your feelings. Being enlightened doesn't mean that when a friend is dying, you don't care. That's not what enlightenment means. But that's the way everyone else was acting. Ananda was the only one who was demonstrating that emotion. Um, and so that's one thing that's positive about Ananda's attachment to the Buddha. The other thing that's positive about Ananda's attachment to the Buddha was that actually he had one of the reasons why Ananda kept pleading with the Buddha to not die, not only because not only because he didn't want his friend to die, but also because he wasn't enlightened yet. He said, "You can't die. I'm not enlightened yet." And what the Buddha never really spelled out, but what turned out to be the case, was Ananda had a very special job. Was he was the first person to become enlightened after the Buddha had died. And so it's one thing for people to sit at the feet of Shakyamuni Buddha and to, soak it in and become fully enlightened with the Buddha right there. But then what happens when the Buddha is gone? And it was Ananda's job to prove that it could still be done even once the Buddha was dead. And so, and he couldn't have done that if he attained enlightenment while the Buddha was still alive. So, but still, his grief when the Buddha was dying was very real. And so, what we feel when we come up against our afflictive emotions, our kleshas, our greed, hatred, and ignorance, is very real. And that's one of the good things about Ananda. He showed it. He wasn't. Sometimes people use the phrase spiritual bypassing, but he wasn't. He was not a spiritual bypasser. Ananda wasn't. He showed his emotions, which is good. And it's also good to know that someone who's that far along, if I'm having problems, I could say, well, if Ananda still had attachments, I shouldn't expect to not have attachments. you know and it's hard. There's no way around that.
Yeah, but even though he
Hmm.
logically knew, he still wasn't able to separate those two
Well,
things.
he,
And that's where I'm having trouble is I logically know that the
mhm.
things that are happening in my life are for the greater good, but at the same time, I'm really struggling with the letting go of it all and being content with this is just part of the process.
Yeah.
The impermanence of it all, right? Because all of my training is in my head.
Hmm.
All of my training is in my head, and it's all in there. Like, remember your training, Tiffany.
Hmm.
Everything is okay. Remember your training. And I'm just really having trouble with remembering my training. I'm like, kind of like, man, screw the training. Like,
Yeah.
and the thing is I know that it will relieve me.
Hmm.
It will take away my pain. It will take away the suffering. I have the training and the tools to do that. However,
Hmm.
I'm I'm looking at them and I feel like I have no hand. I cannot pick the tools up. I cannot access them.
Hmm.
They just are there and I can't see them. They're in a glass box.
Hmm.
So how did Avalokiteshvara practice so deeply that even as a bodhisattva, she was able to liberate herself from that attachment? I need to know. I need the secret recipe.
Yeah.
Like,
No. No. So no one can give that to you. I mean, and so no one can give it to you. You already have it, and you know that already, Tiffany. So
I know, and it's so frustrating because I
yeah,
can't get it right
yeah,
now.
yeah, yeah. Well,
All right.
and you shouldn't, and take comfort, or uh, don't only rely on, and this is just practical advice, okay? This don't You don't have to only rely on your practice, um, talk to friends, uh, read a good book, watch a good movie, whatever you find comfort and happiness in is good, okay? As long as it's not something that's self-destructive. Um, but
Right.
anything that you can find, anything that can take your mind off of it can be very good.
Yeah, I've
And
been doing a
don't
lot.
Yeah, and don't deny yourself that. Don't deny yourself, the simple ways out, while you're still working through it. We all have a long way to go. We have to be in it for the long haul.
I mean, my end game is to achieve Buddhahood,
Yes.
and all of the attachment is just frustrating. I'm over
Hmm.
it. I'm
Hmm.
ready to go into a cave somewhere, I swear.
Hmm.
Like, and I would be happy in a cave.
Caves can be nice.
They can be. Okay, well. I have another question. How come the Heart Sutra doesn't start with "Thus have I heard"?
Okay, that's yeah. So that's there is a version. There's a longer version of the Heart Sutra that does start with "Thus have I heard," and uh, it's so when we call it when we call the Heart Sutra a sutra, everything that's called a sutra is not necessarily the same, okay? Because we chant the Kannon Sutra, okay, which is the 10-line Kannon Sutra. It also doesn't start with "Thus have I heard." Dogen, great Japanese Zen master, wrote a little essay that he called the Mountains and Mountains and Rivers Sutra. That's what he said. Oh, here, I wrote a sutra. So sutra, in especially, and all of these are examples of things from East Asia, where they weren't using the word sutra, they were using the word Qing, which is the word that the Chinese use to translate sutra into Chinese. And Qing is the same as in the I Ching or the Tao Te Ching. So it means any writing that is especially valued and very profound and spiritual or whatever. Um, and so the Heart Sutra, the words in the Heart Sutra are taken from the sutras, um, and but they're kind of, and there's different theories about this, but it's kind of a cobbled together. And in fact, this is in Kuiji's commentary. He says, "Oh, the Prajnaparamita teachings are very complicated, and so the great sages have put together for us this kind of condensed version, so that we can kind of get a foothold in those very profound teachings. It's an entry point. It's a gateway into the Prajnaparamita teachings, and it's a good and this was Kuiji was talking right after his teacher had translated the Heart Sutra into Chinese. 1,400 years later, we're still chanting it. So this gateway that Xuanzang came up with seems to work. It seems to work because people like it, and people like it because it actually does help them. And so it's not a guarantee, but anytime we face difficulty, chanting the Heart Sutra is a good practice. And you can also just chant the Dhāranī. But your original question was why doesn't it start with "Thus have I heard?" And because, at least in the form that we chant it in, it's not a complete sutra. It doesn't start with thus have I heard. It doesn't end. There's always an end point at the end of every sutra where Ananda asks the Buddha, what do we call this one, Buddha? Because he has to, even though he had a photographic memory, he had to attach a title to everything so he could call it up. And his mind was like a big, database. But everything had to have a label on it so that if somebody said, oh, Ananda, they had to be able to give him and that's not in the Heart Sutra either, but all sutras have a part in them where Ananda asks the Buddha, what is the title of this sutra? So it doesn't start with thus have I heard. It doesn't end with the Buddha telling the title and how people should propagate the sutra. And so the longer version does contain those things. The longer version is the one that is used in Tibet and Nepal, and it's likely that they took the Chinese version and added the stuff to it to make it a more complete, because so that people would stop asking, why doesn't it start with thus have I heard? If it's a sutra, why doesn't it have thus have I heard and the other stuff that sutras? So they just kind of fixed it up. But other people say that that version, the longer Tibetan Nepalese version, is the original. Other people say that no, what Xuanzang wrote, and so I don't know. A lot of people claim that they do know, but they disagree with each other. So I'm not going to take a side. It's something that people can argue about. Buddhists like to argue about things. So any other topics or questions or directions? Pretty much you can pick any line in the Heart Sutra and say, what does this mean? You really can. Jennifer, I could tell you were thinking, Jennifer. Good.
Yeah, I had my thinking piece on. The very end in the English version, Gate Gate Paragati, Parasamgate Bodhisvaha. I just enjoy chanting that part at the end, but I'm wondering if I could have some explanation on the.
Yeah, right. So mantras, so that's a mantra. It's the Heart Sutra mantra. And the entire Heart Sutra itself can be treated as a mantra, which I think is a really good thing to do. So when I don't do this all the time, but a lot of times I chant the Heart Sutra over and over again. And when I do that, I always chant the mantra at the end of the Heart Sutra, even though so it's like a mantra within a mantra. I always chant that mantra 3 times. But so Gate, okay. So let's see. So the Heart Sutra itself is called the Heart Sutra because it's like the heart or the essence, or it's the condensed, form of the Prajnaparamita teachings. And the Prajnaparamita teachings themselves are like the core, the most important part of all the Mahayana Buddhist teachings, okay? So you have Mahayana Buddhism, then you have the Prajnaparamita, then you have the Heart Sutra, and then you have the mantra, okay? And the mantra has the core of the Heart Sutra in it. And really the mantra itself, the word that comes up over and over again in the mantra is Gate. Gate, Gate, Paragate, Parasamgate, Bodhisvaha. And Gate, I don't know Sanskrit, but I read things written by other people who do know Sanskrit. And Gate means, sometimes it means coming, sometimes it means going, but it means movement. And so it means movement means being unhindered. And so kind of the essence of the Heart Sutra is, and this is kind of before you get to the mantra, but not too much before you get to the mantra, it says, without any hindrances, no fears exist. Far apart from every perverted view, one dwells in nirvana. Okay. Which is, once you get to that part of the Heart Sutra, things have started to get more positive. Before you get there, there's a lot of know this, know that, know this, and even no attainment and nothing to be attained, right? But then it changes gears, and all of a sudden it becomes more positive. And it even talks about things that are attained. All Buddhas attain Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. And so that's all leading up to the mantra. And so the heart of the mantra, in my opinion, is gate. But then there's gate, and actually the Dalai Lama has a good commentary on the Heart Sutra where he goes through the mantra, and he kind of lays out the little. The Dalai Lama comes from a very intellectual tradition where basically to become a teacher in that tradition, you have to become essentially a professor of Buddhist studies in the tradition in the Tibetan approach to studying Buddhism. And so he kind of has his professor's hat on when he talks about the mantra, but he goes through and he talks about the different stages of the Bodhisattva path and how they correspond to each syllable in the mantra. And I've read it a couple times. I can never keep it all in my head, but I will point to that before we're ending tonight, to that commentary, so that you can see that. But so gate is the main thing in the mantra. And so usually if you've read translations of the mantra, they usually say something like going, gone beyond, bodhisvaha, and whatever bodhisvaha means. So bodhi means enlightenment, svaha means svaha. So svaha is a very interesting Sanskrit phrase, very, 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 very ancient Sanskrit phrase, which is basically a ritual formula that's used whenever you're doing any sort of a fire ceremony. And so one of the traditional ways of practicing with mantras that long predates Buddhism is you recite a mantra 108 times or 1080 times or whatever, and then you do this in front of a fire, and then you throw some sort of an offering into the fire, and then you say svaha, and that's like and so in a more often you do that with a bunch of mantras. Then you move on to the next mantra and you recite that mantra 108 times or 1080 times or whatever, and then once you've kind of built up that and then you throw the offering into the fire, and then you say svaha again. And so, and people come up with different translations of it, but going or gone beyond, bodhisvaha. But the Dalai Lama's explanation is better than that. And also another thing that I want to do want to show several things that people can read. One of them is a very interesting little commentary on the Heart Sutra that was written by a Japanese teacher called Kukai or Kobo Daishi, and he says in his commentary, oh well, the way that I came to understand the Heart Sutra was just by reciting the mantra, the Heart Sutra mantra, over and over and over again. And the great thing about that is that even if you don't come to some great realization of what the Heart Sutra means, it's good to, the mantra recitation itself is extremely beneficial. And so you'll benefit from it. And probably, if you're Kobo Daishi, he was he was a great scholar and writer and teacher. But anybody can recite that mantra over and over again and benefit from it greatly. You may not be able to write, a commentary on the Heart Sutra based upon that, but you will get the Heart Sutra in here. You might not be able to get it here and speak it or write it, but yeah, that's the best thing to do, is just to chant the mantra a lot. And I like the Korean version, Aje Aje Bada Aje Bada Song Aje Moji Sabaha, or Gate Gate Paragate Parasam. And then it's different when you do it with the Chinese accent. It's different when you do it with the Korean accent. It's different when you do it with the Japanese accent. It's different if you do it with a Tibetan accent, even though everybody says, oh no, we're saying it in Sanskrit, but they pronounce the Sanskrit very differently. and our pronunciation of Sanskrit, unless you study Sanskrit and really study it, you're not going to be able, even though we think that gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhisvaha is Sanskrit. It's actually not the correct Sanskrit pronunciation. Elena, unmuted.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. One's very basic. I'm here for the first time, so you probably said it in the very beginning of this course. You said even, just saying mantras over and over is beneficial. So what's the benefit? And not mantras, sutras.
Sutras.
I understand why mantras, but saying sutras over and over, what's the benefit?
So
that's my first question.
So a great Zen master from the Korean tradition, he didn't really explain how it works, but he said the benefit is this, that if you have a problem and you know what caused the problem and you know how to fix the problem, then just do it. You just fix it. If you see something, if you know how to fix something in your life, just fix it. If you don't, then use mantras. So and that doesn't just work for mantras. It also works for reading sutras. It also works for bowing people. And actually, that's a very, very, very common recommendation. If I have trouble sitting, or I can't concentrate, or I try to read these sutras and I have no idea, bow, just bow. But if you have knee problems or back problems like I do, I just had an injection today in my sacroiliac joint, which hopefully will make my back better. It usually does. I have a good back doctor. But so that's my excuse for not doing bows. So I do a lot of mantra practice. I do, and so reciting or reading sutras is good, but these are all ways of overcoming whatever problems you have that you can't just see and fix on your own. When you need some help, that's a way of getting help. And you can think of that however you want to think of it. I mean, one way of thinking about it is that it concentrates your mind. You're cultivating your mind when you're doing that. You are cultivating if you have a problem and you can't fix it, you can improve your mind, and then you'll be able to fix it, right? And one of the ways of improving your mind is to do meditation, right? But one of the things that people have problems, a lot of people have problems doing sitting meditation, and then teachers will say bow, or use mantra. And so Zen Master Sung San was a big proponent of using mantras. When people came to him and said, I tried to sit, I can't, my mind just races and I can't sit still, and he would tell them to do mantra practice while they're sitting, and it helps to calm the mind very much. It does. Yeah, I don't know. So it's kind of like you have to, I mean, that's not an explanation of how does that work, and so you can get into like the Buddhist explanation of how it works is that if you recite mantras, if you recite sutras, if you do bowing practice, the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas will help you. But you don't have to believe that. Although actually you will come to believe it if you do, if you do that. So you don't have to believe it, but you can see for yourself that it actually works.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. It's my practical corporate mind would say, well, first, before even you arrive to to a better mind, to a more focused and clear mind, basically by reading sutras or chanting mantras, you maybe take that mind of yours away from just being in the rut of going around the problem. So which already
Yes.
Task number one, just get distracted from something destructive.
Yeah, and I just want to say something. That's one of the things that's that that's one of the reasons why bowing practice, I mean, I'm talking about full bow, standing up, go down, head down onto the ground, stand back up again, over and over again, 108 times, 1,080 times, whatever. You're all of the racing of the mind goes away, because you're not thinking about anything else except bowing while you're bowing, and so it breaks out of the vicious cycles of thinking. Those and the vicious cycles come back, but at least you experience, and it's important to experience them going away so that you realize that it can go away. Anyway, go ahead. You were still talking. I'm sorry.
No, I if that's the explanation you give, I'm completely happy with that.
Yeah.
But I have another question, which is more on the sutra. I don't know. There's one line that is always it's, to me, it's kind of, it's enchanted, it's mysterious. I don't know, maybe you just kind of, and it's very simple. It's what is it? All dharmas are marked with emptiness.
Yes.
I don't know. To me, it's like it's what's behind it. Your mind.
Yeah, so it's actually really interesting to look when you see something like that. This is one of the places in the Heart Sutra where it's really helpful to look at what these Chinese characters actually mean. What is, we say mark? What is it? So it's like, so you have a dharma, and it has a mark on it, and the mark says emptiness. I mean, if you look at it too literally, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But so this idea of marks or characteristics is very important in Buddhism, and there's a lot of So there's a lot to that. All dharmas are marked with emptiness. So one of the So and here it's important that emptiness is not nothing. Oh, another thing it's interesting is, what is a dharma? All dharmas.
Yes. And what are all dharmas?
What are all dharmas? Yeah, and so this one line in the Heart Sutra is one that people who write commentaries on the Heart Sutra get a lot of mileage out of, and I certainly don't have a nice simple answer to that, other than that each word in that line has to be really looked at, and so one thing that I will say that I find helpful is that one of the meanings of dharmas is that it's so one of the meanings of the word dharma is thing, anything. So one interpretation of that line is that everything is marked with emptiness. Okay, but in Buddhism, everything comes from the mind. So it's really more specifically saying, all, and the technical term, at least that English-speaking Buddhists often use, is mental formations. Okay, all mental formations are marked with emptiness, and so it's really kind of pointing to the activity of looking into your own mind and seeing what's there, and looking at the things that you can find in your mind, and seeing, actually seeing, not just thinking, but actually seeing that they are marked with emptiness. And what is that? And one of the ways that we see that they're marked with emptiness is that they come, they stay for a while, and they go. And then, they don't, and this is actually part of the place where gate comes in, because everything that comes into our mind is completely free. And our mind itself is completely free. We can get in the way and get hung up on things, but everything just comes and goes on its own. And our mind on its own allows everything to just come and go. And that's our true nature. And so it's marked with emptiness is just one way of kind of saying that the true nature of the mind is for everything to just, come and go on its own freely, without any hindrances, you know. And that other phrase, that other line, without any hindrances, no fears exist, points to the problem that we create when we don't allow things to just come and go freely on their own. We create fears, or you know, fear is one way of looking at the kind of problems that we create in our minds, but it's a good one. No one wants fear, right? Yeah. So, you know, there are much better explanations of that. Again, so there are some. I do want to show some recommended things to look at, including a bunch of stuff that you can get for free, as long as you have an internet connection. Which, if you're here watching this class, either live or in recording, you must have an internet connection, right? Okay, so here we are. You can see the screen, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and also, and I'm gonna post the recording of this class on YouTube, and in YouTube you'll be able to download this slide, and it has links in it, and also there'll be a description in the YouTube video, which will also have the links. But these, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These first 5 things are all things that you can just download for free. Now, let's see, is that true? Yeah. One of them is a link to an article on academia.edu, which anyone can download for free, but you have to register with it, and you have to tell them that you are an independent researcher. And so if you're reading about the Heart Sutra, if you're here at this class and you want to read up on the Heart Sutra, you are an independent researcher. So that's no problem. But you do have to register with them and tell them that. These other ones are all things that are free. The first 5 ones are. Khenpo Sodargye is a really interesting. He's a Tibetan Buddhist teacher, but he lives in China. He lives in the People's Republic of China. And he's done a very good job of teaching in China. And he's somewhat well known outside of China as well. And he has a lot of his website has a lot of stuff for free to download, and his commentary on the Heart Sutra is good. These next 3 things are a little more. They're free, which is good, but they're hard. This is the commentary that I was talking about, a comprehensive commentary on the Heart Sutra by Master Kuiji. This is really good. It's definitely worth the effort to at least kind of try to read through it, although it's pretty difficult going. These are 2 really good articles that are worth looking at, especially since they're free. And this 5th one by Thich Nhat Hanh. So this is Thich Nhat Hanh in, I forget what, I think 2012, or maybe it was, I don't know what year it was. He came out with his own translation, his own English translation of the Heart Sutra. And if you read, and his explanation is also here. So you can get his translation as well as kind of the condensed version of his explanation for his translation. The very first thing that he says in his explanation is that he thinks that Xuanzang, the guy who wrote the Heart Sutra, didn't get it quite right. And so his, which I have to admire his bravado in saying that, but, and also I have to admire his honesty in saying that, because many people, when they translate the Heart Sutra, they just kind of say, well, this is what it should say, you know, or this, it sounds better like this. But Thich Nhat Hanh, he comes right out and says, well, you know, the way Xuanzang wrote it isn't quite right, and it has caused people to get confused, and so this is what it should say. And he explains that. So it isn't really a translation. It's his it's his own version of the Heart Sutra. And his explanation is really interesting. It's really interesting to read why he gives specific examples that of people who have become confused by studying the Heart Sutra and getting you know, the wrong idea about, or at least according to Thich Nhat Hanh. And I think Thich Nhat Hanh is a very good teacher. I don't agree with everything that he says, and I certainly don't accept something just because Thich Nhat Hanh said it, but I think he's always worth listening to and taking very seriously. And it's fascinating to read his explanation of, and then he has in addition to this kind of short version, he then has a whole book length version, again with his translation, and then a more extensive set of commentaries. But then again, this is a book, you have to buy it. This is another book that's really good. Oh yeah, Sheng is good. The Dalai Lama. This is the one. This is one that I would actually recommend purchasing if you're gonna go out and spend a few bucks on a Kindle book or a real book. The Dalai Lama's commentary is definitely worth looking at, and this is the one where he explains the Heart Sutra mantra and relates syllable by syllable the mantra to the Bodhisattva path. It's a little intellectual because because basically he is a professor, but he's the kind of professor who does a good job of explaining things, but it's still kind of intellectual. And then there's Red Pine's translation and with explanation of the Heart Sutra, which is a lot of people anybody here have Red Pines? I know. I'm pretty sure Elizabeth has Red Pines, don't you? Heart Sutra? No? Okay. I wouldn't run out to get it, but if you want to have a complete collection of all the relevant English language books on the Heart Sutra, that's a good one to have. And this last one, Buddhist Goddesses of India by Miranda Shaw, that's here because she has a very nice chapter in this book on the Buddhist goddess or Bodhisattva, Prajnaparamita. So Prajnaparamita isn't just an idea. Prajnaparamita is, in Mahayana Buddhism, considered to be a very important bodhisattva in her own right. And that isn't always well known to Western Buddhist practitioners, but it's really fascinating. She is the mother of all the Buddhas, and she talks about how the Buddhas always explained that they could only become Buddhas with her help. So it's kind of interesting. So she says there's lots of Buddhas, but they all have this. They all come from the same source, which is Prajnaparamita. So that's a good one too. I like that book. I always try to recommend that book whenever I get an excuse to do so. This is the cover. Has a nice purple cover. Very pretty book. All right. Stop sharing for a minute so we can see each other better. I do want to give us a chance to chant the Heart Sutra one more time before we go. Are there any? So one thing so we'll meet again. So the Tuesday night chanting group meets every Tuesday night. On the first Tuesday night of the month is when we have more of a discussion like this. And we'll continue at least for the next month or two to do the Heart Sutra. Obviously, there's more to say about the Heart Sutra, obviously. But eventually we'll move on to something else. But if you think of things, even things we've already talked about, if you want to bring them up again, keep that in mind, and do some meditating, maybe some reading, maybe some, chant the Heart Sutra a lot and see what happens is one thing to do. Okay. Speaking of which, we should chant it one more time and then go. Okay. All right. So I'm going to share my screen. You can see my screen now, right? Okay, good. Oh, but that's not the part of my screen I want you to see. This is it. Here we go. Thanks everyone for coming. Been a great discussion, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.